Drake, the last time we spoke, we talked about Miami maybe being the most attainable crown jewel for the Big 12. Since then, I've seen more content. I've seen other videos, articles about Miami to the Big 12. Do you still feel like they're fairly attainable, or what's your vibe there?
I mean, they're number one for Brett Yormark. If you want to stay alive as the Big 12 conference, you're going to have to get brands like North Carolina, Virginia, Miami, even Louisville if you want to put them in there. But the reason I think the Big 12's out on North Carolina and Virginia is because North Carolina and Virginia are out on the Big 12. The footprint, the value that those two schools bring, place them in the SEC or the Big 10, likely the SEC, and that's certainly, given the invite between the Big 12 and that conference, where you want to go. Now, for Miami, the thing that's holding them back is, sure, the market's good, but is the fan base elite? Is there attainable revenue constantly? Is that stream going to be consistent? The question is posed that way because in 2003, you could bring that. Miami was elite. They could go wherever they wanted in expansion, but today, those revenue numbers are down to the point where you say, hey, I don't know if they're valuable enough for the Big Ten to take that chance. If they're trying to get the top two or three brands, if they're able to get Clemson and Florida State, do they also take Miami? If the SEC gets Virginia and North Carolina, do they also take Miami? I think to this point, the answer is probably no. And with that, again, the conversation being different in the last 2 decades, you see how fragile things are in college football, and you see how valuable winning is. Clemson 15 years ago had revenue numbers around Bowling Green in football, but they won. They won in the college football playoff era. Their valuation skyrocketed. Miami's did the opposite. Therefore, they're still at the top of the board for Brett Yormark.
What is the mood? And I almost picture the Big 12 in 3 different categories. There's the Pac-12 teams that got saved. There's the Group of 5 teams that just came up. But if I talk about those actual, like more, traditional Big 12 programs that still exist, the ones that were there and have been there for a while, what is their mood when it comes to conference realignment? Is it a worrisome time, or do they feel somewhat relieved to have added the other 2 groups, or what is the mood kind of in that section of the Big 12?
Everyone feels safe. Everyone feels safe and grateful. The reason that grateful is the word you got to use is because 3 years ago, TCU was looking at the Pac-12. Texas Tech was saying, hey, can we get in the Pac-12? Can you please let us in? We're knocking on the door everywhere. When a Baylor thought, I'm probably not going to exist in the power levels of college football any longer. So every school, the irate 8, the original 8, as of this point, feels grateful to still be in a conference that's alive and grateful to have a Utah, a brand like BYU that stretches so far and wide, even a UCF that I think is a rocket ship. Having those schools in your conference keeps you alive at least for a little bit longer, and that's a life raft, a league like the ACC doesn't have, which is a good thing for the Big 12.
We'll get to the ACC in just a moment. I want to talk about something that may worry the ACC. I'll give you a little bit of a prep for this, but I'll stay on those Big 12 schools. Everybody feels safe, but nobody in life is going to turn down an opportunity to maybe better their situation. What are a couple of Big 12 schools that you think are most likely to, whenever it happens, leave for the Power 2?
Yeah, when the phone is picked up and Greg Sankey or Petitti's on the other line, I think a Utah is answering that conversation quickly with a yes, where do we sign? And there are other schools who understand where they need to be in college athletics from a value standpoint, and the Big 12 is currently the best spot for a TCU, for a Kansas State, on the basketball side for a Kansas, but the day will come, and in expansion, we've heard the conversations of, can Kansas wiggle its way into the Big 10? Now, if you're Iowa State, look, I'm sorry, this is not anything against that school, and it's just it's a part of expansion. Cincinnati, Iowa State, your money, your revenue is not enough to get you out of the Big 12. For Kansas State, for Oklahoma State, for Texas Tech, yours is. You've shown that you can probably put up with the big dogs if and when. I'm going to say if and when, to use some of the Florida State lawsuit verbiage, if and when the SEC and the Big 10 decide we're going to go to 25, we're going to go to 30. Then you start looking at what Big 12 teams have to offer, because I still think a school that so many overvalue like UConn is going to be behind TCU, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Utah, even Colorado. With that, there are Big 12 teams that will not hesitate to take that phone call, and rightfully so. It's millions of more dollars per year.
So looking at the ACC, they're certainly not on the even as good a footing as the Big 12 is. What is the worst case scenario? What's the ACC's worst nightmare right now within conference realignment?
The worst nightmare, A1, is Florida State and Clemson decided to expedite this process and leaving tomorrow. If it is decided that Florida State and Clemson, before the addition of Cal, Stanford, and SMU into that conference, are out on this, we have sped up the process tenfold of how this all shakes down. And if you're the Big 12, you want that. I want to know that there is more security moving forward for the next year, 2, 3 years for this conference. If you're the ACC, your worst nightmare is, 1, losing those 2 quickly, and 2, losing schools to the Big 12. The second that a North Carolina goes to the Big 10 of the SEC, that made sense. We saw that coming. But if the first move off the board is Virginia Tech, Louisville, Pitt, leaving for the Big 12, we have now determined the Big 12 conference that the ACC finds itself comparable with is a better landing spot or has more stability. The second that's determined, the true death of the ACC is apparent. So if I'm the ACC, my first worst nightmare is losing Clemson and Florida State tomorrow. My second is that first school that says, I want the Big 12 instead of you, because when that is determined, all hell truly breaks loose.
What is your percentage that Miami lands in the Big 12? We started with them. We'll end with them.
I'm going to go 40% on Miami to the Big 12, which might still be high. I don't – that's a lot of money, man. The revenue numbers are there. They're a top 30 school in revenue per the EADA over the course of the last 20 years. Right around there with a Clemson, who would be a lot higher had they had a strong first decade of this century. With what they bring to the table, I would be surprised if the Big Ten doesn't say, hey, we're going to expand a little bit more to grab Miami. I don't see a SEC being in the fold for them, but I also don't think the Big 12 is a high bidder for the school that feels like it should be a Big Ten program.
Drake, where can people follow you? Where can they listen to you, find your work?
Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts, and at Drake C. Toll on Twitter.